This is our first Conscious Capitalism event of 2022, and all of them make me personally super excited. Thank you all for joining. If we were all together in person, we would have spent about 15-30 minutes meeting each other, networking and connecting, but we're not in person. And so would love it if you could just open up the chat feature and introduce yourself, share your name, something that you think is important for us to know about you. That could be where you work, where you're from, how you learned about conscious capitalism, but would love to meet each of you through the chat. My name is Leslie Pagel, and one thing that I'd like to share with you about myself is that I am a founding member of the Indianapolis Conscious Capitalism chapter and have the privilege of being the co-president of the chapter this year. It is a topic that fills up my cup personally because it's consciousness and conscious business is something that I care deeply about and spend a lot of my time thinking about. In preparing for today, I found myself reflecting on these two words, conscious and capitalism. And they connect to our credo, the Conscious Capitalism credo. But I found myself thinking about each of these two words individually, and then when you stitch them together, the profound meaning that they have. And for me, when I think about consciousness, I think a lot about being really connected and aware of how I'm thinking. And then for me, capitalism is all about choice. As a leader, when I put these two words together, it's about really being highly aware of my thoughts and feelings so that the decisions that I make are the best choice, not just for myself, but for the greater good. And that connects significantly into the Conscious Capitalism credo, because it really is about viewing the role of business as noble and heroic. It's about humanity. It's about aspiration and progress. For those who might be new to conscious capitalism or not new, but want a refresher, conscious capitalism is centered around four tenets. The first is about higher purpose, which is really the fundamental belief that the role of business is broader than just profit. It's about profit and purpose together. Stakeholder orientation is really about looking to create that win-win-win and creating value for all of our stakeholders, whether it's those are our employees, our customers, our communities, and our partners. And conscious leadership is really about how we conduct ourselves in the business, and coming from a place of consciousness and looking out across the business and being aware of how our emotions and feelings can drive our choices, and being conscious of that and looking to lead from a conscious perspective. And then culture, conscious culture is all about the environment that we create and being really intentional to create an environment where people want to work and do business with us. Our chapter, the Indianapolis Conscious Capitalism chapter, would not be here if it weren't for our amazing champions. We're very fortunate to have their contributions, not just in terms of their volunteerism, but also in terms of their financial support of our chapter. Their generous contributions really reflect their beliefs on the role of business, as well as their dedication to elevating that role here in Indianapolis. So thanks to all of our wonderful champions. So let's get to why we're here today. I am really excited about this topic of civic engagement. because it's a new topic for our chapter. Our chapter has not talked about the role of business when it comes to civic engagement. And I just learned about 15 minutes ago that our chapter is not alone, that it is a new topic in business in general. So personally, super excited and grateful that Dora Lutz is here with us today to share. Dora, before I turn it over to you, what's something that you're excited about for your intro?
Yeah, thanks. Well, and I'll tell a little bit about my story. I think most of the people in this room I have known for quite some time, and they've been, for many of you, very important parts of my journey, actually. So I'm excited just to be here today. I am excited to share this topic because I had some huge aha moments through the research that I was doing with the Civic Alliance. And I think this group will be interested in it. And also, I think, I actually received some notification yesterday that this is going to be an article that the Civic Alliance is getting promotion on to Inc. magazine, either yet sometime this week or next week. So I'm excited because there is national interest in this topic, and because I get to sort of share with you from a sneak peek perspective how I see this fits into conscious capitalism, aspirational business, ESG, the inroads and all the other work that I'm passionate about. And so super, super excited to share this with the group.
Awesome. How do you want us to ask questions? I know we're going to have lots of questions. How do you want to deal with that?
Yep, absolutely. So we do have a lot of time at the end for questions, but I know that this is a really engaged group. So throw them in the chat if you have questions as we're going. If I get a little too deep in the data or whatever it might be, throw it in the chat. Leslie, I'd ask you to help moderate, and then we'll make sure that we have lots of time to discuss at the end.
Happy to do that. All right, Dora, take it over.
All right, so let's get started. So as I mentioned earlier, many of you know my story already and have been parts of this journey. But the fundamental part of why I'm so interested in conscious capitalism and ESG and aspirational business, and I often call conscious capitalism the gateway drug. It was the first book that I read that I was like, it is possible. It is possible for business to do good work in the world. Is that my first job out of school, I worked at a trucking company. And I took the job because I was so passionate about this job description that said the ability to make a difference in the lives of others is why people like this job. And I took it and I did. I mean, I was this, cute little kid, 22 years old, practically the mascot of this company, trying to make things right by my drivers. And I felt like I was able to help them earn a good living wage and operate safely and take care of my customers. And there was an environmental impact. I just felt like this job had all of the pieces of the puzzle that I wanted. But I quickly ran in face to face with the business realities of working in a low margin industry in the early 2000s, where this idea of stakeholder capitalism really hadn't taken root. And it was this painful experience for me of realizing that balancing doing the right thing and doing it in a way that drove business results was often perceived as a trade-off. And that was really frustrating and antithetical to my optimistic, Gen Z self or Gen X self. And so I spent a lot of time really out of that trying to figure out, what does it look like? How do we know that businesses can create positive impact? What does the data show us? Where's the proof? I mean, really just trying to be able to come up with an argument that was so solid that even my dad couldn't disagree with the fact that this was possible. And so here we are. So it's now been, God help me, more than 22 years. I have been wrestling with this question, doing research for the last 3 years. And I've been able to whittle down this idea that there are two ways that business can create impact, either profit or mission, and whittling that down into one thesis that says it is possible for organizations to do both. And the model I use is the aspirational business model. It's similar, but slightly different from the conscious capitalism model, where I'm talking about culture, competencies, and behaviors. What do organizations do that allow them to create these social impact strategies? So they have to have a sense of purpose. They have to be able to measure what they're doing. They need to be creating connection with all of their stakeholders. operating ethically, and telling the story transparently. So lots of overlap and alignment with conscious capitalism, but a slightly different approach. And I measure mine a little differently also to look and see what the data shows. So this is what I have been working on, again, for the better part of my life, is what is this foundation? What does this look like? And when the Civic Alliance came and asked me to participate with them in creating a playbook to think about what civic engagement looked like in businesses, I thought, sure, that'll be an interesting project. I would be interested to find what the data looks like. I think understanding how businesses are operating in this super partisan environment is a really curious component. So there were a lot of juicy questions in there that I was interested to do some research on. And I went in with curiosity, and I came out with this incredible aha moment that when we are thinking about corporate civic engagement, which to me, in most of the research and most of the things that I've been doing in my career, has not been a topic that we've been considering, that we've been discussing in this ethical leadership, corporate social responsibility, ESG space, civic engagement hasn't really come up as a keyword or a theme, other than to say that we want to be corporate citizens, good corporate citizens. So my big aha moment was this: when we start thinking about what it looks like to be a conscious capitalist organization or an aspirational business, that civic participation is the most fundamental way that we allow our people to engage and have their voice heard, especially if you're an organization that works in a democratic society like us, like the US. And so for me, where I went from this idea of like, oh, that'll be a really interesting curiosity, I'm fascinated to know the research, came to this aha moment that in my mind, I almost shifted that if we're not doing this, then we're really missing the boat on the most basic element of building conscious businesses that we can. And that was one of those things. Somebody behind their camera might be thinking, well, duh, Dora, in which case you are way ahead of me. But it just hadn't crystallized for me in that way. And the reality for why it works is the same things, the same reasons that it works when we measure it with aspirational businesses. It works because allowing civic participation, it aligns our stakeholders to taking action towards the values that are important to them. It allows our organizations to increase representation and have diverse voices heard in our communities and within our organizations. It forces our teams to think innovatively about how they can participate with these civic and social issues that are important to them. It increases our communities because it allows the community to have a voice in the issues that are important to them. And then lastly, it creates an opportunity for us to engage healthily in civic dialogue, which benefits not only our people and our communities, but us as individuals and our organizations. So there are just inroads throughout every angle of business leadership for why this supports excellence from a financial standpoint and a human standpoint. So what I wanted to do today and is just walk through, like, what did we find? What does the data show about companies that were engaging in civics? Because this is the part I think is super exciting. What are some examples of companies that are doing this well? And then I want to make sure that I am pointing you to the direction of the Civic Alliance, because there are incredible tools and resources that you can get from that organization that'll help you engage further in this work. So I'm going to pause there. That was a lot of intro. Nathan, I will definitely share that article as it comes out. Are there other questions or things that you want me to make sure that I'm discussing just based on the intro that I've shared so far?
We call it community involvement here at Delta. We're talking the same thing, yes?
I'm sorry, I could only hear the second part of that question.
We call it community involvement at Delta. We're talking the same thing here. You call it civic engagement, community involvement, same thing?
Yes. And actually what you'll see as we go through this is that there are a lot of different ways for organizations to involve, whether it's government affairs, human resources, marketing, community engagement, all of those social responsibility. all of those teams have an opportunity to engage in this work.
But
Okay.
I'm sorry, Dora, to clarify, is community involvement the same thing as civic engagement?
Yes, I would consider it to be an advanced version of civic engagement. So there are actually some really easy things that I'll show you that you can do to make sure that you're leveraging this work. Okay, so let's start with this definition of what is corporate civic engagement. That's a great lead in, right? So how are we thinking about corporate civic engagement? So community involvement is a part of it, but at a broader level, let's wait for that to go away. It's really thinking about how a company is empowering everybody in their ecosystem to participate, both in supporting the community, but also engaging and participating in the democratic process. So there is an angle of voting that actually is sort of a foundation. Are you allowing people to vote? I'll give you all kinds of examples on this. But are they participating in the democratic process at a minimum? And then how are they volunteering? How are they engaging in civic life at a higher level? And really, it's about the policies your organization is setting, the practices that your leadership team is demonstrating, the way you're communicating about the importance of democracy in your organization, and it is all done bipartisanly. There are all kinds of tools and resources. Again, the Civic Alliance is putting these out where you can go in and get toolkits, tips, resources, communication guides, so that you can feel really secure that as you are doing this work, you're doing it in an apolitical way. So it really isn't about partisanship. So this is sort of the definition that emerged. Now, from a civic corporate conscious capitalism perspective, I think this is really fascinating because it ties so well with all four of the tenets. So when you are supporting democracy and engaging people in your communities and your democracy from a purpose and stakeholder standpoint, not just employees, but communities and customers, you are demonstrating your brand values. When your stakeholders are highlighting the issues and the opportunities that are important to them, and your leadership team is taking that as a way to innovate new products and services, or figure out how you're serving more people, it creates opportunities for innovation within the organization. When your leadership team is speaking into the importance of the culture and having people's voices heard, then you are inherently creating the opportunities to support your DEI and create representative decision-making throughout your organization. And then lastly, when you are thinking about culture and having multiple voices and perspectives in that culture, and you're aligning it with your purpose, through the participation in the democratic process, we are allowing opportunities, our employees opportunity to activate within our organization and within their communities, right? Voting allows them to do that as long as they are empowered to be able to participate, which is where that first round comes in. How am I doing on the timing and pacing here, Leslie?
You're doing great. Okay.
All right, good. Just want to make sure I'm not cruising too fast. So one of the first questions that we asked, this is the aha moment for me. What does this look like? One of the questions that came up is there a tie between financial performance and organizations that have this democratic civic engagement effort going on? So the first thing we had to do was define it and then look to see, all right, so is there an intersection between businesses that have a strong civic engagement culture and their financials? And what we found was that yes, they do. Oh, that's hard to see. But the first finding is that corporate civic engagement does drive profit. So regardless of whether you are publicly traded or privately held, there is a tie. Businesses that are more engaged with their communities through civic engagement, and we use the definition here of businesses that were already members of the Civic Alliance. So businesses that had taken a stand to support democracy, those organizations outperformed the S&P through the 2020 period, through the moment that they took the pledge. They outperformed the S&P by 2.2% higher gross margins and 6.5% higher, 2.2% higher gross revenue and 6.5% higher gross margins. So not only did they make more money through the period of 2020, but they also kept more of that money than organizations that were not engaged in supporting the democratic process. So they engaged their employees, they engaged better with customers, they supported their communities, and they outperformed from a profitability standpoint. And that one looks better. And they performed better when it came to investor values. So investors supported these organizations at a higher level. This is the dotted line are civic engagement companies, and the black line are S&P companies. And they received an almost 8 times higher book per price per book value ratio. So they were perceived as more valuable to investors. Nathan, I see you've got a question.
How many organizations are in the Civic Alliance?
Mm-hmm. So at this point, there are over 1,200. For the purposes of this, we looked at only their publicly traded companies, so we could have clear data. And there were about 89. About exactly 89. Other questions? I mean, to me, the big excitement is, intuitively, I think many of us know that doing the work that we are all already engaged with and care so deeply about, that there should be a tie to business, but rarely do we get an opportunity to see it so clearly in dollars and cents. And so I think that was one of the most compelling pieces of the puzzle. The other thing that was really interesting was we went out and asked the people who are doing this work, why are they doing it? And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that comes back to your question earlier around community involvement is that there are many reasons that organizations are engaging in this work, and they're doing it because it aligns with the brand and the brand values that they have. They're doing it because the leadership team believes that this is something that's the right thing to do. It sounds very conscious capitalism to me. They do it because their employees expect them to, because their consumers want them to. So the reasons that businesses are pulling in for doing this work are not simply unilateral. It's not one person coming to the table and saying, we're doing it for XYZ. It's not partisan. It's because of the groups and the stakeholder groups that they are trying to serve. Okay. So that's kind of what the data says. Again, this is actually a 40-page playbook. At the end of this, I will give you the download link so that you can go get it for yourself. I tried to pull out just the highlights of the things that I thought were really particularly exceptional. But let me give you a few examples of companies that are doing this really well. Some of the case studies that were highlighted in the book. So one of the first organizations that is doing this really well in a very compelling way is Old Navy. And Old Navy recognized that their employees were wanting to do more from a civic engagement standpoint, that their customer base was particularly interested in this, that the values fit across the board with the brand. And so they decided, or they recognized that in the 2020 election, that a reduction in poll workers was likely to impact not only their employee base, but also some of their customer base. And that if they didn't have enough poll workers, democracy was going to be in danger. And so the organization activated really quickly across their customer and employee base, and they started recruiting poll workers. And Old Navy specifically told individuals that if they volunteered to work as poll workers, that would count as paid time. So they were given paid time off, not just to vote, but also to volunteer as poll workers. They also engaged, they did a lot of brand outreach. They did a lot of patriotic merchandising. So you could see a lot of their voting shirts that they were selling, that fit well within their merchandising strategy. And they did a lot of work to increase outreach and support the voting process, really by using what they had at their resource, which is manpower and interest and enthusiasm. And as a result, they recruited over 2,000 poll workers. They increased their brand recognition, and they really led the way in the industry for other organizations to be coming to the table and participating in democracy in a new way. So they really lived out their brand values. So in this case, it was about making sure people had access to vote. It was about engaging their consumer base, and it was using volunteers to go out into the community and support the democratic process. Pretty fascinating. Questions or comments on that example? Okay. The second example, I think, is really also, I could talk about this all day long. The second one is Under Armour. So Under Armour is in Baltimore, and that's where they're headquartered anyway. And one of their questions was seeing that their employees were asking for more in terms of voter outreach and voter engagement. And so Under Armour went out and they did a few things. Also, their CEO is a naturalized citizen. And so part of his life experience is this innate understanding in the power and the importance of participating in democracy. And so as he came to the table, he recognized that there were people who didn't either understand how to leverage that power, didn't have the capabilities to leverage that power. And so he wanted to go out and make sure that the organization was creating awareness, education, and reducing obstacles for people to participate in the democratic process. So Under Armour did some really cool things. Again, they did paid time off. They did voter education. So they brought tools both internally to their employees that helped educate on what elections were coming up, what people needed to know about the elections, where they were supposed to vote. I mean, things that if you are already engaged in the democratic process might seem obvious, but are not for people who have either been historically disenfranchised or just haven't been taught how to do this. And so doing that awareness piece and helping people reduce those obstacles is huge. So they did the paid time off. They created these voter education kits. They brought education in-house. They partnered with outreach organizations within their communities to increase awareness for people who were in the community, but not necessarily Under Armour employees. And then they did all kinds of voter activation as well. So they actually have a running app for people who are fans of the brand, and they would allow people to go out and track their runs. And they were challenged to create runs that would have some sort of vote message. So you would see like a running map for somebody that would be running in the shape of vote. Leslie, this is right up your alley, right? Going out and creating affirmations in the community through their running patterns of what they wanted to see. And then people could go in and see on the app how they were engaging. So Under Armour, again, figured out how to reduce those obstacles, aligned it with the values. All of these were led by the CEO, and they figured out how to engage their communities, their customers, and their employees. The third one, the one that kind of blows my mind with the ingenuity and the commitment, is Snapchat. So Snapchat really sort of answered this third level question, which was about engaging customers. Obviously, their demographic skews younger, and they want to be able to learn about what issues are of interest to their politicians, where they vote, how to vote, all of these different pieces of the puzzle, and putting them on a digital channel that was native and understandable for this different demographic. And then through that, they spent a lot of time engaging their community and sharing messages, creating voter outreach to their community. They encouraged financial donations from employees to be supporting grassroots organizations. And again, they allowed those employees to use their volunteer time to go out and participate in election-related activities that were important to them. One, just a side note, a story from when I was teaching. My first semester at Purdue was an election year. And of course, this is a little self-serving because I needed to have the time off because my kids were home on election day. We close our schools in Indiana when people are voting to keep them safe as the community enters the schools, which is great, except obviously can be a challenge for working parents. And so as a result, I needed to figure out how to have some flexibility, and it was a school day that I was teaching at Purdue. And so I had told my students that they could have the day off from class, but they had to do some kind of election-related activity. And so some of them did remote ballots. Some of them voted on campus, and they had planned ahead of time. We had figured out what their strategy was going to be. But it was amazing how many pieces of feedback from my students I received that said, wow, that was way easier than I expected it to be. And we just forget, I think a lot of times, even I forget, that it is intimidating to do something that you've never done before. And so we do have to create education and awareness and support to people to try something new, even if it's something as, simple as voting, where if we've done it a few times, it doesn't feel intimidating, but it can early on. And so that's one thing that really strikes me with the Snapchat example is that moment that I had of, well, yeah, of course that makes sense in retrospect, but I didn't realize that what I was doing, I just really needed the day. I really needed the day off, and it kind of worked for everybody. And so Snapchat has done that same approach, right? By helping younger generations figure out how do they vote, what do they need to know, who are the candidates that they care about. And then actually after this report came out, they launched a new effort that is focused on getting people engaged in local civic government by understanding what are the positions that are open, what would you need to know for election to run as a candidate. So they've taken this entire component and said, instead of just going out and voting, you need to engage at the local level in your government. And here's how you can do that on a volunteer basis. And this is the part that I think is crazy. Then in a good way, then they allowed users to nominate other users who they thought should run for like city council or whatever the local organization is. And they had a huge, I'd have to go get the stats, I've forgotten them since, but a huge impact in the number of people who opened the app, who participated, who looked to see who was running and who nominated people that they knew. And I think sometimes just being called to the carpet to say, hey, you'd be great on city council, right, is as much of an invitation as people need sometimes. And I thought that level of innovation was really, really powerful. And then the last example that we have in here is Levi's. Levi Strauss & Co. has a long history of stakeholder management, everything from workplace safety to community engagement, and even now to sustainability. And so they are really moving forward proactively on a lot of issues. And so for Levi's, the question became, how do we align with the various priorities that we have around diversity, around sustainability? And they saw civic engagement as a way to continue to advance the efforts that they have strategically. So same thing, they did a lot of voter outreach, both to their employees and their customers. They offered the employee support, employee training, and then they gave their employees time off also to make sure that they were able to access, have the time that they needed to access the vote. So lots and lots of organizational opportunity. And some of these you can see across the board. Some organizations are just figuring out how do we make sure that people have time to vote. Others are really thinking highly about it as a strategic advantage. But regardless of where you're at in the organization, there are steps and things that you can do to advance this work within your organization. So let me pause here for questions, and then we can kind of talk through next steps.
Or it's Leslie, I have a question. These examples illustrate that stakeholder orientation piece of conscious capitalism, the tenet, which is about creating a win-win-win, and you can just see it in all of these examples. And one win is elevating the brand, which can lead to profit. I'm curious, any examples more from the B2B side? Like I see the consumer engagement so clearly with these cases. I'm just curious, any thoughts on more of a B2B case?
Mm-hmm. Salesforce aligns really clearly with these two. Actually, I put Salesforce at a level 4. I had them in here and I swapped them out for Snap, but I would put Salesforce in here. So Salesforce has the time off to vote. They allow employees to use their volunteer time from a community engagement standpoint. And then they have all kinds of civic engagement tools that are available for their employees. So you can actually get almost like a badge for going in and becoming educated about what the civic process looks like and how to engage. And that is actually available to all customers. So you do not have to be a Salesforce employee to access that. It's part of their sort of available training tools that they use. So I would put Salesforce in that. I think we see Salesforce coming out more and more as a company that I would consider to be a more vocal, conscious company. And I think this just fits within their cultural values of equity and engagement. And I think they're doing it from an employee standpoint, not just a brand standpoint.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Dora, a question for you.
Yeah.
Challenging question, okay? Plain devil's advocate here, all right? Is there any downside? To companies promoting civic engagement or pitfalls?
Mm-hmm.
Up is because a couple of the companies you've referenced here got into some little hot water in the last couple of years, not necessarily for their civic engagement, but I would say kind of adjacent things in these areas. So I'm just kind of wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I should have pulled those in. I did not. So in the playbook for each, which I'll give you the link here, with each section, they're like, here are 5 or 6 things that you can do within each of these different levels to take action immediately. And there are watch outs within each of these different areas. So some of the watch outs that I would say are making sure that it actually does align with your values, right? Which it seems obvious, right? But it's painful how many times organizations don't. I think making sure that, so that's one thing that comes to mind right away. Making sure that you are, that you're doing the basics first, right? So if you're going to come out and say that you're engaging and you care about civic engagement, but you're not doing the basics of making sure that people have access or time off to access that vote, to me, I think that feels insincere. And I was reading a study last week that said like 43% of people are thinking about leaving their jobs because their company is talking about DEI, but not taking enough action. Which I thought that was a pretty stunning, breathtaking statistic. So thinking about those. Another watch out that I think bears warning, it was a big learning for me. We have to recognize that, I have to recognize that I am in a position of privilege where I have not been historically disenfranchised. And so to me, voting feels like a really easy way to engage in the community. But if you are somebody who has not been able to vote easily, who has been kept out of that system, they're just saying you should go vote doesn't necessarily feel like a very compelling message. And so in that case, advocacy, grassroots volunteerism, community outreach, those types of things can be way more powerful for groups that look differently than I do. So that was a big watch out for me. Making sure that you're bipartisan is important. I think civic engagement helps with that. And then the last thing I think is from that lobbying and political perspective. I don't think you can go out and advocate directly with your government if you aren't doing these things at home, right? I think there are things that an organization should be doing within their community that don't necessarily involve lobbying. And so I see that's one area where I think companies are getting in trouble. So that's the world according to Dora, things that I'm seeing. I don't know that I would necessarily say they're all in the playbook, but those are things that I would watch out for from a conscious capitalism, aspirational business standpoint. Kathy. Okay, so Kathy asked a question here about companies exiting the Russian markets. Is that civic engagement? So I actually went and pulled the list of companies that have pulled back out, the one that Yale is keeping track of. And I went to see what was happening from an investor standpoint. And those companies that did saw a precipitous reduction in investor value. So they did lose money when they pulled out of Russian markets. So I don't necessarily know what to make of that, except to say it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few months if that was a strategic decision that benefited them. To me, I'd like to think it was, but I'm not always convinced.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been holding on to that graphic. I haven't posted it on social media because I'm not sure I have enough energy to listen to what people are going to say right yet.
Right.
But it's really interesting to see how investors responded to that.
It's you can just say it's like if they're really living their values, that's what they're going with it. They're willing to take the hit. You've seen it in recent years of CVS dropping cigarettes. And everybody's like, they took a hit from an investor standpoint because it was like, I want to say it was like $2 billion in revenue, something huge. Yet they ended up seeing returns. Walmart just announced they're not going to sell cigarettes anymore. It feels like it's like in the same realm of, yeah, we know we're going to take a hit initially, but it's going to pay off later, and/or we're living our values. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, like you said.
Yeah, I hope you're right. So the post that I made the other day, I went back to look and see if they pulled out of Russia. Had they made a statement about human rights in the last year? And I think there were 50 publicly traded companies on that list that I pulled. 40 had made a statement in the last year about human rights, but only one, well, actually zero, had made a proactive statement around the Uyghur population, the Rohingya population, or Syrian refugees. So to me, there's a part that feels like this is politics and not necessarily advocating for human rights, which, I think we can do better. I'll just leave it at that. So I'm sure when those 50 companies come knocking on my door, I'll be like, let's talk. Let's talk. All right. Did I answer your question well enough, Kathy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, that was great. Thank you very much.
Okay, awesome. And there is a reference in here about politics industry by Michael Porter. I love everything that Michael Porter says, so I will put that on my list of things to read next. And then we'll do another talk on that, Leslie. Actually, we'll just see if we can't get him to come and talk to us. How's that? Okay. All right. So things that you can do. Let me get back on track here. I'm making notes for myself over here. Here are the 3 things that I would suggest that the people on this call, if you're interested in this work, do. So the very first thing, if you do nothing else today, go back to your HR playbook and try to understand what your election day policies look like and make sure that you are removing obstacles that allow people to keep people from voting, right? So whether it's a flexible work schedule, a no meetings day, giving them time to get out and do mail ballots beforehand. I mean, there are millions of ways that your organization can do this. Those all are in the playbook. So they give you all the tools that you need. Second thing you can do is take the Civic Engagement Pledge. Again, all of this is through Civic Alliance. And I was telling Leslie earlier, all of this content, all of this information is theirs. They're the experts on how you activate this stuff. I'm just the person who got to come in and help do the investigation and put some of the content together. So this is an incredible organization. I am very fortunate that I've gotten to meet people there, and you are in incredible company with the group of organizations that they have brought. So I would suggest taking the pledge. It's very straightforward. And then you can download the Civic Engagement Playbook. And it is, again, a 40-page workbook. You can choose and build your own action plan for the next 6 months, and join some webinars to learn about what you can do to go deeper in your organization. I would highly recommend, if you have somebody who's deeply engaged in your organization with community outreach, maybe somebody within an ERG group, find the people who are already caring about the civic engagement perspective, bring them into the conversation and use them as the way to understand what's happening at Civic Alliance and bring it back to your organization. Use those resources of people who are already passionate about this work. And Lauren, I think you've got the links for this, yes? Okay, and we're gonna mail those out. So that's really it. So if you want to learn more, if you want that article as it comes out, I'm sure you'll be hearing from me all over social media maybe. Nathan, I'll make sure you get that specifically. I believe I'm connected with most people on this call, but if I am not, here is where you can find me. And I'm happy to kick around ideas or questions, thoughts about this as they pop up. And happy to connect you to people at the Civic Alliance too, because they are an incredible resource.
Are you seeing any more push for local elections? You know, it's real easy to get fired up about the big ones, the presidential ones, yet we constantly hear, hey, there's, you know, all these local ones every year, every other year. You seeing any more push there, or is it just sort of starting with the presidential ones?
No, well, you know, you're right. It's easier to get people engaged and excited about the presidential elections, but the power from an employee engagement standpoint, it's in that individual advocacy piece. So are you going to elections? Are you volunteering? Are you completing outreach? So it's the local piece that's really, really important.
What about one thing that you brought up early on is you mentioned ESG and you said stakeholder capitalism. Do you have any concerns with that getting, frankly, corrupted? Because like the big investment firms are trying to push companies to go this route. Sounds all good and noble, yet small businesses are going to struggle to get there. We saw a lot of small businesses close in the last couple of years. Just curious your thoughts from that standpoint.
Yeah. So I would say my thoughts on that are unrelated to necessarily the civic engagement perspective. I think it is valuable to have the money pushing CEOs to be thinking about ESG. So the momentum and the number of questions that I'm receiving on a weekly basis about ESG are stunning. Because everybody knows they need to do it and nobody really quite knows how. And to your point, every investment firm has their own approach to it. So how do we prevent greenwashing? I think the World Economic Forum is trying to come up with standards that will allow us to measure apples to apples. And I think that will be helpful. The other piece of the puzzle, I think, is we have to be as consumers paying attention and pushing back when we see that happening. To me, that's, I don't know how we keep bad actors from acting badly, other than to take action when we see them doing it. One piece of data that I am working on right now, when you look at companies and the keywords that they're using related to social impact and ESG, if they are only talking about it in their ESG reports, they are actually not performing as well as if it's actually integrated in the organization. And so what that tells me is that it's less about a strategy for ESG and an actual ability to execute ESG. And that's what's driving performance. But I don't know, I share your concern, right? I have those moments where I wake up in the middle of the night and think like, is this going to have a negative impact that I didn't intend? Are there negative consequences to the way that I'm talking about this and promoting it? And I hope not. I hope not. I hope authenticity in action is what people take away from ESG and my words.
You make a good point about the consumer, you know, vote with your wallet, vote with your feet. It's probably the same thing with employees. That might even be a first step, even before the consumer is internal employees, recognizing it, calling it out, and just pushing the companies to do better when they see it. Because companies are gonna stumble along this, since especially how new it is for a long time.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I hope it's progress, not perfection.
Yeah, and kind of related to that, Nathan, I can't help think about the concept of that we're talking about in how it could even weave into the culture, not just in terms of benefits and time off, but like, are there examples where companies that are doing this are also doing it in how they run their company, a more democratic process within their walls, you know, asking for feedback, voting on things, you know, and making it also a part of how they do business.
I mean, that's a great point, Leslie. I mean, I think you're seeing the potential of how this could flow. I do think, I'm trying to think of an example of a company where they were really doing it. Yeah, the more we can understand what it takes to advocate for a diverse group of voices within our communities, the better we're going to be able to do it in our organizations. But yeah, I mean, I think your observation could be a statement as much, rather than a question like that. I think you said the truth for what it could do. Are there other comments or questions, things that are running through your minds?
It's just me, as we're talking about this, I think back to my last business, and I had my office right outside the break area, and we had TVs for the staff. And at one point I banned news because I think it was 2016, and I was listening to these, burgeoning fights outside my office. So I just cut it off. But what I like about this, especially for the small business perspective, under 100 employees, how do I do some of this, ESG, Civic, all these things, right? This is a very simple thing to do, is to say, look, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to discuss your politics, but we are going to give you the opportunity to express your politics by giving you time off to go vote on the days that are voting. And I think it's incredibly important to do that, not just for the big nationals, but for the locals, which is what really hits the local employer and small business owner the most. So I think that is, I like this because it is such a straightforward, simple way to both promote civic engagement from your employees without having to come up with 8,000 policies to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, good. Thank you. That's a great example. I think, Craig, what you said, that I think there are a lot of people who are afraid of those break room fights, right? And totally understandably. And there are ways for people to bring in, the same way that we would talk about a coach to help with difficult conversations, right? To engage in civil discourse, there are ways to do that. There are actually online programs that will help people learn how to do that. But again, those are for after you've done phase one and you're ready to move on and go deeper, right? You can't just jump into the deep end of this pool and not have something fearful happen.
It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? I'll start down, I'll get to self-actualization someday and do some of those things. But if I want to do something concrete, that's a great entry point into it, I think.
Absolutely. Alexis, what are you thinking about with this? I've got just a couple minutes left.
Hi there. Yeah, this is my first exposure to any conscious capitalism discussion or meeting. So I've just kind of been following, variety of thought leaders on LinkedIn recently and came across this. So it's just very refreshing type of conversation. I think the thing that sort of stood out to me is there's so many organizations that say one thing, but don't necessarily put their actions behind it. So if there are things that we can all sort of do to, have our leaders drive real action around, the statements that are being made, I love that. So this was just a really refreshing conversation to listen to today. So thank you.
Good. Thank you. Well, thanks for being here. I'll speak on behalf of the Conscious Capitalism chapter. Sure, Leslie's clapping, so that's good. That's good. All right. Well, I know we've got a few minutes left if there are any other questions. Otherwise, Leslie, I'm going to turn it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you. Once again, want to flash up our amazing champions and thank them for their support, not just in terms of their volunteerism, but also financial support of our chapter. Alexis and others, if you want to stay connected with us, there are a variety of ways that you can do that. The first is through the Conscious Capitalism website, which Dora will go to the next slide here. You can get information about the Indianapolis chapter there. It's also where you could sign up to have information sent to you We are active on LinkedIn and would encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn, and not just follow us, but let's have a conversation there about what you're seeing, what you think about conscious capitalism, and share it with others. And that's how we're going to spread the word and have more of these conversations. And then if you have time and you're interested and watching some of our prior events, we have a YouTube channel where you can check out some of our other events there. Last thing, two things. One, thank you all for taking time out of your day. Thank you, Dora, for bringing this important conversation to the Indianapolis chapter. It's been eye-opening for me personally, so appreciate it. Also would love your feedback. Lauren put a link to a survey in the chat. If you've got just a few minutes, share with us your thoughts, topics of interest, those types of things. We're always looking to bring great content and a great conversation to the community. So thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Dora.
Thank you.
Thank you.